Hey folks, tonight we kick things off with something raw, massive in scale, and totally unforgiving. We're diving into the day-to-day of Roman life, not as a noble, not as a ruler. Forget fancy headpieces or soaking in sculpted tubs. Tonight you're not Caesar. You're just an ordinary person, thrown without warning into a world full of sandals, sewage, and state-approved executions. So before you settle in, do hit the like button and subscribe, only if you're truly into the kind of work I do here. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is on your end. I always love seeing where people are tuning in from. Now lower the lights, maybe let a fan hum in the background, and let's gently ease into tonight's immersive tale. Your eyes open to chaos, chickens squawking, and a crying infant echoing from somewhere down the corridor. Congrats, you've just come to a Roman insula. Basically a stacked-up tenement from ancient times. Picture a multi-level hazard zone, held together with ancient dust, whispered prayers, and suspect construction techniques. You're most likely lodged on the 3rd or 4th story, which is bad news. The higher the floor, the poorer the resident, and the more likely your ceiling will cave in if someone upstairs tips their oil jar. Your space is no bigger than a closet. The stone walls sweat during summer and become icy in the winter chill. There's no real window, just a hole in the wall that lets in smoky air and the occasional winged intruder. Your mattress is packed with straw, and probably lice. The blanket smells like wet sheep wool and poor decisions. No furniture. No decoration. And definitely no place to cook. Lighting even a small fire indoors could torch the building, and no one's invented safety rules yet. Your worldly belongings? A clay cup, a threadbare tunic, and if you're feeling extra, maybe a wooden comb. Forget toilets, not in your room, not in the entire complex. Just a chamber pot in the corner, silently throwing shade. To empty it, you'll have to make the treacherous descent down a narrow, creaky staircase and pour it into the roadside gutter, hoping you don't trip and become part of the morning waste yourself. Oh, and your walls? They're basically made of paper. You hear your neighbor muttering prayers, coughing up something unhealthy, arguing with his wife, and regretfully, not arguing with his wife if you get the drift. The air is thick, filled with smoke, mold, and the unmistakable funk of unwashed bodies. Someone downstairs is already baking bread, but you're not part of that breakfast plan. Vendors on the street are shouting prices for overripe figs and discarded fish parts. Somewhere down the block, a centurion is barking orders at someone who's probably already bleeding. And you haven't even left your building yet. You're itchy, sweaty, and maybe even breathing in traces of lead from the plumbing. Welcome to your Roman day. You're not a nobleman. You're not a famed warrior. You're just another weary face in a jam-packed housing block, hoping to survive the stairwell and not anger a street deity before lunchtime. And guess what? You've still got nearly a full day ahead. Now that you've successfully navigated the rickety staircase of your insula, it's time to handle priority number 2 this morning, relieving yourself. No restroom in your apartment, of course. No basin. No running water. Not even a bucket that lets you keep a little dignity. Instead, you shuffle along the road, chamber pot in one hand, shame in the other, heading for the nearest latrina. That's Rome's version of a public toilet, and calling it public is being generous. It's more like a bathroom/social club for people who don't mind eye contact while doing their business. You arrive and find a long stone bench with carved holes in it. Beneath it, a shallow trench runs with a bit of water, just enough to whisk away the collective embarrassment of the lower class. You take a seat, if you're brave, and hope the person next to you isn't in the mood to make small talk. Privacy? Doesn't exist. Doors? Laughable. This place is basically a community plaza with echo chambers. Traders chat about market prices while squatting. An old veteran complains about his aching joints. Meanwhile, you're doing your best not to lock eyes with the man opposite you who's munching on olives and refusing to blink. Then comes the real highlight, the tersorium. A communal sponge attached to a stick, kept in a bucket of vinegar or brine. The idea is to rinse it before using. In reality? Let's just say this sponge has witnessed horrors. You wipe, cautiously, and pray that the vinegar actually worked its magic. If you're lucky, maybe you had the sense to bring your own cloth. If you're wealthy, you might use moss. But chances are, you just shared what everyone else did, and now you carry the quiet burden of communal hygiene. And if you think you can dodge all this by sneaking into an alleyway, think again. Public urination was illegal. Fines were real. And Roman guards were known for subtle warnings. Roman justice isn't exactly known for giving gentle reminders. Once you've finished your business, you go to wash your hands. Or rather, you think about it. But hold on, there's no soap, no flowing water, just a basin where everyone rinses off. It's touched more fingers than a politician during campaign season. You leave the latrine a bit lighter in body, and slightly heavier in existential dread. But hey, that's Rome. And now, it's time for breakfast, if you can even call it that. You've handled your morning needs, avoided falling into a ditch or being dragged off by guards. Well done. Now it's time for what Romans claim is the most important meal of the day, which, for them, is just a polite custom before heading off to labor and suffering. Welcome to the Iantaculum, Rome's version of a morning meal, which consists of exactly two things: dry bread and watered-down wine. Occasionally, you might get a sliver of cheese, maybe an olive, but mostly you get let down. Forget your cozy breakfast dreams. Romans didn't know coffee. There were no eggs, no sizzling bacon, no warm pancakes, and absolutely no trendy oat milk lattes. This meal isn't meant to make you smile. It's just enough to keep you standing. Your bread is probably panis rusticus, a tough, grainy brick baked yesterday, or possibly the day before. It's chewy enough to serve as a weapon and feels like chewing on stone. The wine? It's diluted because even the Romans knew that being drunk before sunrise was a bad call, unless, of course, you were a senator. No kitchen in your insula, so you stand in the street or squat by a fountain, eating alongside other tired citizens who chew bread like it's tree bark. If you're lucky, you might have a drizzle of oil or a dab of garum, that salty, fermented fish sauce Rome was weirdly proud of. That just adds a burst of horrifying aroma to your already grim meal. If you were rich, maybe you'd get some fruit or a drop of honey. But you're not. You're a regular Roman, just wealthy enough to avoid slavery, and just broke enough to longingly eye your neighbor's cracked jug of goat milk. Sometimes a vendor strolls by with fried chickpea cakes or sweet pastries, and for a fleeting second, you feel hope. But then you remember, your coin pouch is emptier than a gladiator's mercy. So you gnaw your bread and pretend it's dessert. And that's how your day kicks off, with carbohydrates, light dehydration, and the sinking feeling that you're about to walk 7 miles in Roman sandals with nothing but wine fumes and crumbs to fuel you. It doesn't get easier, because now it's time for your job. After a filling meal of stale despair and dry crust, you head out to face what Rome calls the workday. Let's not sugarcoat it. Unless you're a senator, a poet with a sugar daddy, or one of the rare few who inherited land from a mysteriously dead uncle, you're working hard. You might be lifting loads as a laborer, hauling goods as a porter, shaping clay as a potter, stacking bricks, sweeping streets, or if the gods are especially cruel, cleaning sewers. Rome needs a lot: roads, aqueducts, shrines, bathhouses. And someone's got to build it all. That someone is you, with your own 2 hands, under the blazing sun, wearing sandals that cushion your feet like soggy leaves. Your Roman workday starts at the crack of dawn, often earlier. The sun is barely peeking over the skyline, but your overseer is already shouting in Latin and waving a stick. Late? Kiss your pay goodbye, or worse. Expect humiliation, a beating, or dismissal. Which in Roman terms means starving with dignity. Your tools are basic. You dig with a splintered shovel held together by hope. You carry bricks on your back. You fetch water from a cistern that smells like old laundry and broken dreams. No gloves. No hard hats. Just dust, sweat, and the looming threat that one wrong step could snap your spine in your employment. And if you're a tradesman, good luck surviving. You're up against 100 others selling the same rough pottery, sandals, or stitched-up tunics. Undercutting prices is normal. Quality doesn't matter much when a wealthy customer decides your face annoys him. Even the respectable jobs, courier, accountant, or teacher, aren't glamorous. As a messenger, you're dashing through Rome's chaos with scrolls under your arm. As an accountant, you're writing numbers no one will remember. As a tutor, you're trying to teach bratty little senators in training who already think they're minor deities. Women? They're working too. Spinning thread, weaving cloth, selling produce, running stalls at the forum, plus raising children, plus managing the home, plus, not dying during childbirth. Basically, multitasking before it was fashionable. And after all that, maybe, just maybe, you'll get a short lunch break. Unless your boss woke up angry or drunk. Or both. To impress some visiting official? You either work, or you wither. Rome might be eternal, but your spine definitely isn't. You've now slogged through the morning, still conscious, unwhipped, and upright. Good job. Time to brave the next obstacle, the Roman street. It's a messy, shoulder-to-shoulder obstacle course, clearly designed by someone who had no respect for hygiene or your personal space. Imagine it, the sun blazing overhead, the city buzzing like a kicked beehive, and the streets teeming with life, not the poetic kind. The literal kind. We're talking rats scurrying, flies swarming, stray dogs barking, goats blocking alleys, beggars pleading, vendors hollering in a medley of languages, kids running loose, and con artists pretending to help the elderly while filching your purse. It's like Times Square. If Times Square had no sewage system and everyone was dragging a farm animal behind them. Let's talk about Roman roads for a second. They were an engineering triumph. Straight, solid, and professionally constructed. But those perfectly laid stones, usually coated in a cocktail of pee, spilled wine, barf, animal droppings, and yesterday's garum-scented regrets. The center of the road acts as a free-flowing sewer. Step off the raised curb without looking and boom, your foot just got baptized in the ancient slurry of urban despair. Carts and wagons rumble past. There are no speed laws, no marked crossings, and certainly no patience. They don't yield for pedestrians. In fact, Roman law banned daytime heavy cart traffic. So what happens? Drivers tear through the streets at night, at full speed, no brakes, like deranged chariot racers trying to beat a deadline. If you don't get flattened by a wheel, you'll probably get shoved by an elbow, bashed by a fruit basket, or screamed at by a fish vendor defending his questionable eels. The air? Oh, it's a masterpiece of misery. Smoke pours out of cooking holes. Temple incense clouds your vision. Latrine fumes drift in on the breeze like nature's warning. Dead animals? Yeah, people sometimes just leave them. Dog keels over in the forum? Toss a tunic on it and move on. And let's not forget the entertainment. Random street fights, angry crowds protesting taxes, or an obnoxious senator's parade blocking the way for hours while trumpets scream off-key melodies into your ears. Yes, the Roman street is alive, and it wants you gone. One slip on a fig skin, one wrong step into a racing ox cart, or one unfortunate look at a nobleman's pet monkey, and you're done. And all you wanted was to buy some lentils. You're filthy. You're drenched in sweat. You'd do terrible things for a splash of cool water. Here's the good news. You live in Rome, a city famed for its waterworks. The aqueducts are jaw-dropping feats of human ingenuity, piping crystal-clear water from distant hills straight into the beating heart of the empire. The bad news? That water doesn't care about you. Unless you're rich enough to live in a house with your own private fountain, you're sharing it with thousands of coughing, sneezing, finger-licking citizens who've never heard of hand-washing. Your main options? Public fountains. They're packed with people filling jugs, scrubbing their feet, or occasionally dipping unruly toddlers in for some sort of ancient half-bath. And by hygiene we mean, make it wet and hope for the best. If you really want to clean up, your best bet is the thermi, the Roman public baths. They're everywhere. Everyone uses them. Sounds advanced, right? Well, sort of. The water circulates between pools. But there's no soap, no disinfectant, and barely a shred of shame. You'll be soaking shoulder to shoulder with a dozen other men, none of whom believe in covering up. The conversation? Loud. Political. Occasionally naked. One guy might try to sell you socks. Another's digging wax out of his ear with a stick. And the water? It's been used by everyone. If you came here hoping to feel clean, you're actually just simmering in bacteria with a splash of verbal scent. Also, fun trivia, Rome's plumbing? Built using lead pipes. Yep. The Romans adored their infrastructure, but chemistry wasn't their strong suit. Over time, this brilliant plumbing system could reward you with a lovely grab bag of side effects: anemia, gout, infertility, and if the gods are feeling generous, full-blown madness. Want to drink something safer? Try wine. Seriously. Water was often avoided, especially in poorer areas where runoff from latrines mixed with what came out of the fountains. So wine, diluted, but ever-present, became the everyday drink. For adults. For children. For the old. For the angry. Because what better way to deal with a crumbling empire than with a low-grade buzz? Yes, Rome brought fresh water to its people long before most of the world could even imagine plumbing. But for your average citizen? Every sip, every bath, every splash was a gamble. Or maybe just rinse off your sore feet. Enjoy those aqueducts, just try not to trust them too much. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't a rare occurrence, it's the ever-present soundtrack to your existence. Stub your toe? No ice, no pills, just clench your jaw and limp through the day, hoping it doesn't fall off. Crack a bone? Wrap it in a filthy cloth and pray your next breath doesn't make it worse. Get a splinter? Great! That's how infections start, and sometimes how people end. Comfort isn't exactly part of Rome's values. Ergonomics? Never heard of it. Padded chairs? Nope. Rest? Only when you collapse? If you're a builder, you're lifting stone with a hernia and a silent prayer. If you're a soldier, you're marching 20 miles with bleeding heels and a poisonous bite throbbing in your thigh. And if you're a woman giving birth, prepare for agony. Your midwife might chant something, but beyond that, you're on your own. Every part of your body is one small mistake away from becoming a gaping wound, or a cautionary tale whispered in the forum. And unless you live near a temple with a particularly enthusiastic priest, your best shot at healing is a handful of herbs, some smoky incense, or flat out ignoring the issue until it goes away, or you do. Forget anesthesia, doesn't exist. Surgery means screaming into a wooden stick while someone saws at you like they're fixing a cart axle. Pop your shoulder out? Marcus, the local strongman, will shove it back in. His qualifications? Watching someone else screw it up once. Dental care? Picture a blacksmith's workshop. Now imagine your mouth is the anvil. And if you're enslaved or broke, people don't even pretend to care. Bleeding on the street? Best you'll get is a muttered. Try not to stain the tiles. Even the upper crust treated pain as something to be proud of. Stoicism was the trend, suffer in silence, and you're noble. Complain about your broken arm? Now you're not just injured, you're weak. Real Romans endured pain, and then wrote poetry about it. So yes, pain is always lurking around the corner, and it never shows up with warning, mercy, or a bandage. On that pleasant note, let's take a peek at what happens when you actually visit a Roman doctor. So you're hurt, maybe from yesterday's infected blister, or maybe from trying to shave with a bronze razor and now your jawline looks like a battlefield. Either way, you decide to seek medical help, which, in ancient Rome, is more of a gamble than a guarantee. Let's start with the basics. Roman medicine was an unpredictable brew of Greek theories, vague magic, and a shocking devotion to tree bark and leaves. At its core, the body runs on 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Not feeling well? Clearly one of these is out of sync. The answer? Drain something. Anything. So your doctor, who might also be your local barber, grabs either a knife or a handful of leeches. Because bloodletting is the go-to fix for everything from a headache to a bad attitude. Coughing? Let's slice open your arm. Depressed? Same answer, bleed out the sadness. Surgery? Oh yes, they had it. Roman doctors used scalpels, tweezers, even bone drills. What they didn't use? Anesthetics. You stayed awake, fully aware, clutching the edge of a wooden bench while a man in a questionable robe dug into your flesh with all the confidence of someone who skimmed a scroll once. Antiseptics? Not really a thing. If you were lucky, they might rinse your wound with wine or vinegar, which helped a bit, but burned like Jupiter's wrath. Infection was the rule, not the exception. Death? Often part of the experience. Prescriptions? Could be anything. Honey, garlic, ground up bugs. A paste made of ashes, herbs, and very specific animal poop. If that didn't work, off to the temple. Maybe the goddess Asclepius will send you a healing dream. Fingers crossed. And if that fails, the doctor shrugs. Your family lights a lamp. Your neighbors whisper about what kind of omen your slow decline might represent. It's not that Romans didn't care about health. They just hadn't worked out what cured people and what quietly finished them off. So the next time you sneeze, be grateful for penicillin, painkillers, and a world where healing doesn't usually begin with a bloodletting ritual. The Romans called it cena, but don't expect anything cozy about it. First, let's go over what's not on your plate. There's no pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, no spuds, no cocoa, no sugar, and absolutely zero coffee. None of those delights have been discovered or made their way to Rome yet. This isn't Italian cuisine, it's purely survival chow. You settle in front of a wooden bowl filled with something warm and brown. It's likely pulse, a kind of porridge made from spelt, lentils, or beans. The flavor? Think soggy pebbles with a hint of thyme, if you're lucky. If not, it's just soggy pebbles. Protein's a luxury. Unless you caught it, hunted it, or fished it yourself, you're not getting any. Meat costs a fortune. And when you do get some, it's probably sketchy. Rome had no refrigeration, so meat preservation meant drowning it in salt, smoking it to a crisp, or submerging it in garum, that infamous fermented fish sauce that smells like the ocean gave up. Feeling fancy? There might be some boiled greens, hard cheese, or a wrinkled fig on the side. Meanwhile, the rich are feasting on flamingo thighs, honey-roasted dormice, or jellyfish marinated in vinegar. Meals that scream, I have money and no taste. Your wine? Always diluted. Drinking it straight was seen as barbaric. But don't worry, the water it's mixed with probably isn't clean either, so you're really just choosing how quickly you want stomach trouble. Dessert? If you're lucky, dried figs. Maybe a handful of nuts. Or maybe you're skipping food altogether because it's a holy day and your god thinks dessert is vanity. Tiramisu? Doesn't exist. No napkins either. You either share a communal rag with 10 strangers or wipe your hands on your tunic and pretend it's fine. By the end of dinner, your belly is full, but confused. Your breath smells like garlic, watered wine, and mild regret. Still, at least you're not hungry anymore. Now all you have to do is survive whatever Rome calls nighttime. And believe me, it's not about relaxing strolls under the stars. After a full day of filth, sweat, and cursed fish sauce, you're probably dreaming of something peaceful. Well, surprise. You're in Rome. And Rome lives for entertainment. The bad news? Most of that entertainment is horrifying. Let's begin with the crown jewel, the Colosseum. An architectural wonder. And also the place where your soul goes to curl up and cry. Here, crowds gather to watch men slaughter each other for cheers. Or to see wild beasts rip apart condemned criminals. Sometimes, when the emperor feels theatrical, they flood the arena and reenact naval battles, with actual ships and actual drowning. Admission is free. Sounds generous, right? Until you realize it's free because the government wants your mind occupied while senators quietly hike up your taxes and claim new provinces behind the curtain. You sit crammed in between sweaty strangers, applauding as someone loses a leg. There's blood, sand, and the occasional execution performed with a bit of artistic flair. You find yourself clapping, though you're not entirely sure why. Looking for something more refined? Try the local theater. Head to the amphitheater for a play, maybe a tragedy in Latin you barely understand. Or a bawdy comedy where the punchline involves someone pretending to seduce Jupiter with a sausage. Subtle? Never. Romans like their jokes loud, crude, and aggressively acted. Feeling sporty? Make your way to the Circus Maximus. Chariot races are fast, thrilling, and incredibly deadly. There are no barriers, no helmets, and lots of yelling. Wrecks happen constantly, and the audience eats it up. People cheer. People bet. And if you support the wrong team, you might have to throw hands just to get home in one piece. And then there's the street-level chaos. Fire jugglers, acrobat troops, wandering musicians, grifters doing card tricks, and the occasional shirtless philosopher shouting about the meaning of life with spittle on his beard. Don't like the current act? Wait 5 minutes. Something, or someone, weirder will take center stage. Behind it all, though, there's a clever madness. Rome didn't just distract its people, it hypnotized them. It used spectacle as anesthesia, gave the crowd blood and noise so they'd forget the pain of surviving. And if none of that works, well, there's always more wine. Now let's stroll into Roman justice. Spoiler alert, it's not the comforting kind. You've made it through a brutal shift, a sad dinner, and a front row seat to a guy getting run through for applause. You might think you're safe now. That keeping your head down means the law's got your back. That's adorable. In Rome, the law isn't there to shield you. It's there to remind you that you're tiny, disposable, and that mercy is reserved for marble statues and bronze busts. First things first, your legal standing matters. A lot. If you're a citizen, you technically have rights. You can't be whipped in public, unless someone with clout gets irritated. And yes, you get a trial, on paper. If you're not a citizen, justice skips the formalities and goes straight to fists, hot metal, or a quick death beyond the city walls. And if you're enslaved, you are property. If a slave kills their master, even if that master was a monster, every slave in the household might be put to death. Just to send a message. And that message? Don't even think about it. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect a polite chat and a lawyer in a toga. Trials in Rome are more like open-air theater. The wealthy roll in with witnesses, gifts, and grand gestures. You show up with your threadbare tunic and a sinking gut feeling. Tears might buy you a little sympathy. But if you don't have influential friends, you'd better pray the magistrate isn't nursing a hangover. Punishments aren't just designed to hurt, they're designed to dissuade. Thieves can be branded or have their fingers crushed. Liars might get a spike through the tongue. Fraud? Try public flogging, or exile, if you're lucky. Insult the emperor? You don't go to prison, you get executed. And not quietly. The Romans like to be creative with it. Some crimes are meant to be punished publicly, on a stage that makes the morning's execution look like a warm-up act. Crucifixion is a favorite. Long, painful. Humiliating. It wasn't just for Jesus. It was the standard punishment for rebels, thieves, and anyone the state wanted to turn into a warning sign. And don't expect help from the local lawmen. Rome's enforcers, the vigiles, are part firefighters, part cops, and fully overworked and underpaid. If someone robs you, they might shrug. If you bribe them, they might help you rob someone else. So yes, Rome has laws. They're carved into stone and read out loud in public spaces. But they don't serve justice. They serve authority. Now let's talk gods, because in Rome, you're not just obeying rulers. You're answering to the divine. After dodging the courts and surviving the streets, maybe you hope religion will offer some comfort, a little peace, something personal. Nope, not in Rome. Religion here isn't your private relationship with the divine. It's a public, ever-present system of rituals, incense, and unskippable obligations wrapped around every moment of your day. You don't pick your gods. They come with your family, your region, your job. And there are gods for everything. Literally everything. Door hinges? There's a god. That weird smell in the sewer? Got a deity. Boundary lines? Mold? Yes and yes. You can't walk 10 steps without passing a shrine. Skip the bow, ignore the candle, forget the prayer? You're not just rude, you're inviting disaster. Maybe not right away. But when your roof collapses or your goat keels over, people will nod wisely and say, "Ah, he didn't leave an offering during Saturnalia." Religious festivals clutter the calendar. Dozens every year. On those days, work halts, bulls are sacrificed, and the scent of burning meat clings to the marble. You show up because you're devout, but mostly because you're scared. Because when the gods are ignored, they retaliate, with disease, famine, or a drought that ruins everyone's barley stew. Then there's emperor worship. The state wants you to see the emperor not just as a man, but as a divine being in a toga. You're expected to light incense, sing his praises, and definitely don't roll your eyes during his victory parade. Because if you do, that's not just rudeness. That's borderline treason. Fail to join in a ritual? Stay silent during a major festival? Forget to toss grain on the altar fire? Congratulations, you might now be labeled impious. Or worse, suspicious. And in Rome, suspicion spreads faster than a street brawl. Belong to a foreign cult? Keep it quiet unless it's officially sanctioned. The Roman state doesn't like unfamiliar gods, unless they bring wine, soldiers, or tax money. Roman religion isn't about what you believe, it's about what you do. Properly. Punctually. Publicly. And while you sacrifice that goat, you'd better look happy about it. Speaking of appearances, let's talk about the slippery slope of Roman ambition. You've kissed the god's sandals, dodged a courtroom disaster, and emerged from the public bath without catching something that sounds mythical. But now comes the most. Now we come to the most draining part of Roman existence, the social pyramid, a ruthless, precisely engineered system where your tone of voice, posture, and even how you tie your sandals can elevate or destroy you. Think of Roman society as a ladder, but it's slicked with oil and lined with sharp edges. At the top, you have the senators, ancient wealth wrapped in togas stitched with purple and estates large enough to need their own postal zones. Next, the equestrians, the elite merchants and financiers who aren't quite nobility, but have more cash than your average temple. Then come the plebeians. That's you? The strugglers. The working class and lower middle class crowd just trying to keep their tunics clean and their heads down. Beneath that, freedmen, slaves, foreigners, and that one guy who once cracked a joke about Augustus's statue and now sweeps the latrine steps. Want to climb the social ranks? You'll need a patron. A powerful figure who'll vouch for you in exchange for lifelong favors, errands, blind loyalty, and the occasional politically convenient vote. It's like having a boss, a landlord, and a slightly menacing uncle all rolled into one smug package. Each morning you participate in the salutatio, the daily ritual of sucking up to your patron. You wait in line with the rest of his clients, compliment his hairline, flatter his child's toga, and beg for help, usually in the form of food, money, or a recommendation. If he's feeling generous, he tosses you a coin and maybe lets you carry his litter through the forum. Congrats. You're now officially connected. Every move you make from that moment is under scrutiny. Your tunic doesn't need to be trendy, but it must be spotless. Speak properly, choose your friends wisely, and whatever you do, don't look too ambitious. Nothing scares Roman society like someone climbing too fast. The moment you gain momentum, others will plot your fall. Socially or physically. Networking in Rome is a blood sport. Gossip is as valuable as gold. One misplaced comment at a dinner could end your public life. The right marriage could save your entire family line. But be careful, this isn't about love. Marriage is politics. Land, names, and inheritance are the real vows. Even if you do manage to claw your way up, don't relax. One bad crop, one skipped ritual, one whisper from a jealous enemy, and you're done. You won't even hear the knife that ends your upward journey. Now, as the sky darkens, surely things get quieter, right? Wrong. The sun dips behind Rome's towering rooftops, and for a brief second, you dare to think, maybe now I can rest. But when night falls in the eternal city, peace doesn't arrive, it simply changes shape. Let's start with visibility. There is none. Unless you're wealthy enough to burn oil through the night, you're stuck with moonlight, guesswork, and whatever your memory can muster. Stumble in the dark? Don't expect help. They might just steal your sandals. Rome's night patrol, the vigiles, are technically your firemen and guards. In practice, they're overworked, underpaid, and more interested in napping than defending the innocent. A few are brave. Most take bribes. And none of them are enough. Criminals know this. Pickpockets, muggers, and ex-gladiators with nothing to lose wander the alleys looking for easy prey. Alone in the dark? That's you? It doesn't matter who you are. If you're not armed, invisible, or incredibly fast, you're a target. And then there's the real terror, fire. Those charming, flammable apartment blocks, the insulae, are mostly built from wood and desperate dreams. Cooking after dark is forbidden for a reason. But hunger doesn't care about regulations. All it takes is one bump lamp, and a whole neighborhood can become a glowing pile of ash before sunrise. The Great Fire of 64C didn't need much to get going, but once it did, it burned like the wrath of the gods. You might believe your building's secure, until the scent of smoke wakes you up at midnight. There's no evacuation plan. You grab your tunic, your chamber pot, and if you're lucky, your pride, and you sprint down a collapsing staircase into chaos. If fire doesn't get you, maybe the noise will. Rome never really sleeps. Somewhere, a drunken house party echoes down the stone walls. A procession to honor a half-forgotten deity parades through the street with drums and off-key chants. And if a senator's lover is having a meltdown, everyone within shouting range knows. Sleep in Rome is a rare privilege. Silence? Fiction. Safety? For the wealthy, the armed, and the absurdly fortunate. But hey, dawn is close now. You just have to survive one more night. And then do it all over again. You might imagine nightfall brings peace, a soft breeze, a quiet meal, maybe even sleep. Think again. Rome doesn't rest when the sun goes down. It simply transforms, becoming louder, darker, and far more dangerous. The city never truly sleeps. It lurks. Let's begin with the biggest fear of the night: fire. The towering, wooden insulae, those fragile homes of the poor, are basically matchsticks stacked in rows. One careless flame, one spilled oil lamp, and the entire block becomes kindling. There's no professional fire brigade. Just the vigiles, part-time firefighters, part-time night guards, and full-time underfunded civil servants. They carry buckets and hope for the best. If your building goes up in smoke, they might save you, or you might become tomorrow's cautionary punchline. Then there are the thieves, pickpockets, bag snatchers, and career cutpurses who treat the dark as their invitation to hunt. Rome's backstreets are tight, twisted, and black as pitch. Torches are too costly for most. Walking at night means moving by feel, by habit, and with a prayer in your throat. Don't carry anything shiny. Don't meet anyone's eyes. And above all, don't get caught in the middle of two drunken ex-gladiators bickering over a lost sandal. Speaking of drunk, Rome's nightlife is raucous. Taverns overflow with cheap wine, clashing music, and men shouting bad verses about Mars and the women they'll never win. Arguments turn to brawls. Dice games end with blood. And sometimes, a bitter noble sends his slave to publicly beat someone for an ancient grudge. If you're smart, you keep to the shadows and pretend you saw nothing. And if you're a woman walking alone, may the gods protect you. Rome isn't kind to unescorted women after sundown. The streets belong to the desperate, the reckless, and the dangerously bored. Even sleeping isn't safe. Your insula groans as if it's considering collapse. Rats scuttle through the walls. Your neighbor's cough sounds like a goat dying on a slow timeline. In the distance, someone screams. Could be violence. Could be pleasure. Could be both. You bury your face in a sweat-soaked pillow and beg Mercury for silence. But silence doesn't exist in Rome. Not for you. Because even the night here makes noise. And when morning finally arrives, guess what? You get to do it all over again. You woke up in a crumbling death trap, endured communal toilets, stampeding traffic, gore in the arena, poisoning via plumbing, leech-based medicine, forced worship, flaming rooftops, and being mush-drowned in fermented fish juice. You bent the knee to higher forces you don't know, followed laws that don't defend you, and slept through riots, rats, and a public beheading. You're filthy. You're sore. Probably infected. Emotionally destroyed by the shared sponge. And it's only been one day. Could you survive another? Honestly? No. Probably not. Most of us, with our thermostats, antibiotics, and 30-minute grocery delivery, would collapse before lunch. You'd surrender before the second dose of garum. And yet, the Romans didn't. That's the infuriating, awe-inspiring truth. In the middle of all this chaos, pain, and absurdity, Rome functioned. Somehow. They built cities, roads, baths, bridges, libraries, forums, and amphitheaters. They spanned continents, created legal systems, charted stars, cut into human bodies and called it surgery. And they invented concrete that, 2,000 years later, is still standing. They laid the foundation for half the modern world. Latin became the root of entire languages. Their buildings inspired cathedrals, government halls, and college quads. Their political ideas, senates, vetoes, elected officials, still echo in modern democracies. But there was a price. For the average Roman, not the emperor, not the nobility lounging in marble, life was a daily struggle. A constant war against the filth, the fire, and the hunger. And yet they endured. They innovated. They didn't have the luxury of comfort, so they built legacy instead. Rome wasn't made of gold. It was constructed from fear, ambition, sweat, and sheer will. Layer upon layer. Person by person. Year after bloody year. And that's why it lasted. As for you, by the next afternoon, you'd be trading every last denarius you had just for a hot shower. You're sitting in a modern chair, with a backrest. And that's perfectly fine. You're not here to survive ancient Rome. You're here to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate that once, long ago, someone walked those same filthy streets and helped shape a world where you now sit, clean, safe, and only moderately traumatized. Now, picture this. You're a royal-born woman in the 2nd century BC. A princess of the Parthian Empire. You carry a name that sounds like it belongs in epic poetry, Rodigan. More importantly, you don't live in a court of peace and pearls. Your world is one of rebellion, war horses, and the ever-present chance that your morning snack was poisoned. Your father? Mithridates II. Not a ceremonial monarch, he was a conqueror. A builder of empires. He took Parthia from a dusty backwater to a serious rival to the Roman Republic. But expansion brings consequences, rebellion, betrayal, and neighbors who refuse to acknowledge that your army now owns their rivers. Rodigan didn't grow up watching musicians and flower tossers. She watched ambassadors argue in marble halls, generals sketching battle plans into sand, and court scribes frantically trying to figure out who was loyal this week. She wasn't groomed for gowns and pleasantries. She studied tactics, leadership, and how to wear armor without clashing with her jewelry. And here's the crucial part. Parthian noblewomen weren't wallflowers. They weren't always center stage, but they knew power. Some ruled cities. Others brokered dynastic alliances. A rare few, like Rodigan, weren't remembered for their marriages. They were remembered for their victories. And yes, Rodigan would have victories. But not yet. Even in her youth, she was already a living emblem of Parthian pride. She carried with her a legacy of leadership, a whisper of prophecy, that she would either marry a king or become one in spirit. And she didn't seem the type to sit idly by while cities burned or governors rebelled. While other royal women were being perfumed and polished, Rodigan was likely reviewing supply lines and border disputes. She didn't have time for vanity. In fact, she would one day swear a vow that she would not wash her hair until the rebellion was crushed. Spoiler, it would take some time. But before we get to that battle-scarred, dusty-haired moment of defiance, we need to understand, what kind of revolt has the audacity to challenge a princess who'd rather ride with soldiers than pose for mosaics? The Parthian Empire, majestic on maps, was less marble and more patchwork. It stretched from the Persian Gulf to the edges of Mesopotamia, stitched together with marriages, oaths, and the occasional sword jabbed into someone's chest. So when the western provinces, likely in Media or Babylonia, rose up, no one gasped in shock. What did surprise everyone? How organized, bold, and dangerous the rebels were. These weren't angry peasants. These were elite city lords and powerful families. They weren't dodging taxes. They were burning forts, silencing royal envoys, and essentially telling the crown, "You can polish your own sandals." Normally, the king would send a general, or maybe a distant cousin. Someone with too much ambition and not enough brains. But these weren't normal times. And for reasons still debated, was it timing? Politics? Sheer stubborn royalty? Rodigan took command. Not as a figurehead. Not as a royal who says, "Let me sign the decree and look fierce." No. She mounted a horse, strapped on armor, walked into camp, and made a vow that would burn itself into legend. She would not wash, comb, or so much as tame her hair until the rebellion was over. It was defiant. It was symbolic. It was a logistical nightmare for anyone in charge of royal grooming. But it wasn't about vanity. That vow was a visual promise. Her dignity was now tied to the empire's survival. Every time someone looked at her tangled, dirt-caked hair, they remembered, "This isn't over until we win." And that did something. Her soldiers didn't just see a princess. They saw a war leader letting her beauty rot with the rebellion. They saw someone giving up personal pride to embody grit, duty, and vengeance. She became the Parthian spirit made flesh, not seated on a jeweled throne, but riding through dust and sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels? They probably didn't know whether to mock her or run. They expected a distant general, a polite emissary, maybe a sulky noble with a scroll. Instead, what they got instead was a furious woman with tangled hair, charging toward their stronghold with steel in her stare, and absolutely no patience for conditioner. And worse, she wasn't bluffing. When Rodigan departed from the capital, there was no grand send-off. No flower petals, no harp music, no trailing crowd of perfumed nobles. Her entourage was cavalry, resolve, and the crushing pressure of an empire desperate to stamp out dissent like a squashed fig. She looked the part, too. Gone was any trace of courtly elegance. Her famously untamed hair started to resemble a living emblem, hanging in dusty defiance, a tangle of battlefield spirit. In a culture obsessed with appearances, Rodigan turned hers into a form of psychological warfare. The campaign was no walk in the palace garden. This wasn't a matter of paying off a gatekeeper or knocking down a wall. The rebel cities were well prepared and confident. They were expecting delay, hesitation, maybe a half-hearted show of force from the capital. What they got was a war-hardened commander who wasn't afraid to fight dirty and ride harder. Rodigan didn't hesitate. Her grasp of military tactics was precise, sharper, arguably, than many who'd held command before her. She used traditional Parthian methods, high-speed mobility, false retreats, and sudden ambushes. Her troops would materialize like ghosts at the borders of rebel strongholds, vanish, then reappear from a completely unexpected angle the next day. Word spread among her ranks. This wasn't a noble in armor. This was a warrior who led from the front. Her nails caked in dust. Her helmet hiding eyes that had long abandoned patience. And as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, her hair grew heavier with sweat, dirt, and the battlefield's prayers whispered into every twist of the strands. By the third month, her locks were said to be thick ropes of matted grit and symbolic fury. The rebels whispered a new name for her, Witch Queen. Not because of sorcery, there was none, but because no noblewoman had any business still fighting in the dirt, caked in war, and still refusing a bath. Surely, they thought, something unnatural was keeping her going. But there was nothing magical in her defiance. Only brutal, relentless resolve. By the time her forces reached the final rebel city, her reputation had swelled far beyond the campaign itself. Tales of her had moved faster than supply lines. In barracks, in taverns, in enemy camps, soldiers muttered jokes with nervous laughter, not about Parthian swords, but about Rodigan's hair. Would it ever be washed? Would it still be there after the war? The enemy wasn't laughing. The final stronghold stood ahead, fortified, arrogant, convinced of its own strength. The gates were reinforced, the archers stationed high, the storerooms packed with stolen supplies. The rebel leaders sat behind thick walls, confident they could wait her out. That confidence would cost them everything. By now, the myth of the woman who wouldn't wash had spread like wildfire, even inside enemy territory. Some claimed her hair had become strands of metal. Others said she hadn't closed her eyes in days. The rumors stacked like siege towers. But Rodigan wasn't myth. She was reality. And she didn't rely on rumors. She relied on strategy. Instead of charging in, she chose attrition. She strangled the city instead of stabbing it. Supply chains? Cut. Communication lines? Seized. Drinking water? Contaminated. The rebels had prepared for swords. They weren't prepared for starvation. Rodigan used time as a blade, letting the city rot from within while she waited outside in the same tents as her soldiers. She wasn't perched in luxury. She shared their coarse bread, their bitter wine, their itchy blankets and nightly cold. She inspected weapons. She paced the walls. She never once lifted a comb. By this point, her vow had become sacred. No one dared joke about it. It had transformed into a living relic of national will. Every tangle said, "We're not finished yet." Inside the city, despair spread faster than rumors. The defenders had planned to break morale. Instead, their own began to unravel. Food grew scarce. Arguments flared. Loyalty dissolved into whispers of betrayal. Then it happened. A gate, small, rarely used, perhaps left unguarded out of exhaustion, was discovered by a scout in Rodigan's army. That night, cloaked in darkness and carried by wind, her soldiers slipped through. And by dawn, the gates were wide open. The city was hers. Rodigan, her face streaked with ash and sweat, stood tall atop the battlements, unwashed, unrelenting, and terrifying in her triumph. There were no celebratory horns, no grand marches. Her victory wasn't declared with music, it was announced with water. After endless weeks of fighting, choking dust, and relentless pursuit, she stood before her warriors. Not draped in regal silks, but clad in the same dented armor she'd worn since the first battle cry. Her armor bore the scars of countless encounters, her face weathered by the punishing sun and constant tension. And her hair, that infamous, tangled, filthy cascade, now hung behind her like a war flag woven from steel and myth. But she had done it. Each rebellious stronghold had fallen. Every traitor had been brought low. Now, with her oath fulfilled, she was free to do what no one else in the Empire had dared attempt on her behalf. She could finally cleanse her hair. As legend and oral tradition recount, Rodigan did not retreat to a gold-laced chamber. No, she summoned her servants to a public square. She wanted her fellow warriors, the ones who had fought, bled, and wept beside her, to bear witness. Tubs were filled. Oils were heated. Combs emerged from storage like sacred instruments. And beneath the open skies, the grime-covered warrior of Pathia began to wash away the dust of revolt. It meant something. Each knot undone was another province reclaimed. Each rinse of water a ritual, as if the rebellion itself was being cleansed into the earth, restoring the land with each drop. Some said she cried. Others swore she laughed. But no one argued with the silence that fell over the army. Toughened veterans, burnt by the sun, carved by battle, stood frozen as they watched. Rodigan didn't need a crown. One wasn't placed upon her head. The dust had become her coronet, her vow more precious than gemstones. In that moment, Pathia didn't just see a royal. They saw a symbol. She could have marched straight back to the palace in triumph, let the elite write poems, and bathe in lavish praise. But she didn't. Instead, she lingered. She stayed in the tents. She ate what they ate. She listened to the murmurs of her soldiers. Rodigan knew her legend had just begun, but she wasn't looking for gold statues or royal flattery. She wanted to be remembered in truth. After the hair washing, an event etched into memory like iron into stone, Rodigan could have returned home in splendor, with parades and propaganda to last generations. But she chose another route. A slower one. She journeyed back deliberately, revisiting each city she had reclaimed. She walked their alleys, inspected their defenses, spoke with their people. This wasn't pageantry, it was wisdom. She understood the peril of triumph, how quickly victory could rot into apathy. Empires don't collapse solely from losing wars. They crumble when they forget why the war was fought in the first place. Rodigan wanted to remind both rebels and loyalists that Pathian might wasn't just iron and coin. It was her, in flesh and conviction. A woman who chose hardship over opulence, and won loyalty not through command, but through example. And that loyalty was real. In every city she entered, people didn't come to glimpse royalty. They came to see her. Not decorated, not perfumed, just real. She didn't carry fear, she carried responsibility. She didn't bark orders, she listened. She paid out of her own war funds. She took complaints seriously, rewarded those who stayed loyal, and offered mercy. Carefully, cautiously, to those who admitted their mistakes. By the time she finally reached the royal court, her story had already taken on mythic proportions. Scribes scrambled to write it down. Artists debated, should they depict her with tangled hair and battle grit, or as luminous and transformed? Officials whispered behind closed doors, what does it mean to have a woman, oath-bound, victorious, standing at the very heart of Pathian power, with half the empire behind her? It became a question of politics. What do you do with a princess who holds more influence than most kings? Some said she should be married off, to dilute her power. Others wanted her permanently installed as a military leader on the border. But Rodigan didn't seem to care for any of that. She had already proven her worth. The battlefield had been her throne, the dirt and scars her crown, and her name, already carved into the hearts of soldiers and commoners, needed no royal decree to last. Rodigan didn't require a coronation. She had already been crowned, not with jewels, but by legacy itself. In the months that followed her military triumph, she didn't chase admiration. It found her anyway. Poets wrote verses. Sculptors carved tributes. Whispers turned into legends. Not because she demanded attention, but because she had undeniably earned it. Every soldier who served under her returned home with a story, and every story made her larger, more revered, and more impossible to ignore. Yet inside Pathia's palace, where politics moved like shadows behind woven tapestries, her silence was unsettling. She didn't brag. She didn't plead for positions. She asked for no estates or honors. Instead, she observed. She listened. She understood that the new battleground had moved from open plains to quiet corridors. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother depending on the murky tangle of Pathian lineage, treaded lightly. Rodigan wasn't just liked. She was honored in a way few at court could rival. Not because of her appearance or ancestry, but because she led. She turned a personal vow into a national strategy. Her dirt-streaked image had transformed into cultural myth. Yet, her quietness was not hesitation. It was deliberate, like a general studying a map before striking. She didn't share her next step. Maybe because even she hadn't decided. For the first time in ages, she wasn't riding into war, issuing orders, or tracking rebels. She was still. And that stillness unsettled everyone. What does a woman who triumphed without a throne do next? Some scholars think Rodigan used her silence like a sword. Her mere presence, her glance, her calm, could halt conversations. Officials second-guessed themselves, wondering what she might think. Commanders postponed decisions, waiting for her subtle approval. Her quiet wasn't weakness. It was leverage. She had discovered that staying silent could echo louder than 100 speeches. So she continued, a legend wrapped in flesh, walking palace halls. Her freshly cleansed hair, now braided with strands of gold and memory, challenged the system by simply existing. She had shown that strength didn't only belong in the hands of men. It could gallop into war, tangled and fierce, and return victorious. And now she waited. Because sometimes, the smartest move is to make none at all. As time passed, Rodigan's name began to vanish from official scrolls. The scribes of Pathia, eager to glorify kings and dynasty builders, started to omit her chapters. The silence she once wielded as power became the excuse for forgetting her. No towering monument bore her likeness. No state-funded epic carried her deeds on golden parchment. But true legend doesn't ask for permission. It survives anyway. In the remote posts where her army had marched, in the villages she spared, her name still lingered. Mothers whispered her stories to daughters, not as bedtime tales, but as cautionary truths for any man foolish enough to doubt a woman with purpose. Veterans spoke of her battle tactics like scripture, and even the descendants of rebels spoke her name as if, at any moment, she might rise again from the soil, hair wild, purpose burning, ready to fight. There's something deeply disquieting about someone who breaks every expectation and still prevails. Rodigan didn't settle for being ornamental. She didn't spend her days plucking lutes, painting gentle doves, or perfecting the art of being politely ignored. She blazed across her time like a streak of fire, and then vanished before they could capture her. Historians still argue about her fate. Some say she vanished into obscurity by choice, opting for calm over court drama. Others believe she became a quiet advisor, shaping national policy from behind veils and titles. And the dreamers? They imagine she rode out one final time to settle some distant border dispute, fading into legend, never confirmed, never denied. But here's what we do know. Her impact survived where it truly mattered, in the hearts of people. She didn't need a crown to rule. Rodigan reshaped the meaning of loyalty. She proved that a promise, even one as strange as refusing to touch a comb, could carry the weight of law. And perhaps, even more. She didn't need a monument in stone. She had already been immortalized in the dust of her homeland. Rodigan didn't need carved marble or royal tombs to last. All she needed was to keep her promise, and win. Centuries after her death, her story still lingers, a mystery both widely told and rarely written down. No statue bears her image. No tomb echoes her victories in sculpted verse. But in the hearts of those who value resilience, rebellion, and relentless will, she endures. Not like monarchs are remembered, through titles and lineage, but like storms are fierce, elemental, unforgettable. Rodigan didn't need to conquer empires or pen treaties that spanned generations. What she overcame was far harder. She shattered expectations. In a time when women were told to wait behind veils while men spilled blood, Rodigan ripped the veil apart and stepped forward, barefoot, helm in hand. She never requested power. She simply claimed it. And instead of faltering, the empire followed. But her real lesson, the one she carved into her people's memory, wasn't about command, it was about loyalty. Not loyalty born of fear, but loyalty earned through sacrifice. Through leading from the front. Through holding a vow longer than anyone dared believe possible. She wasn't flawless. No legend ever is. But her legacy survived because it wasn't perfect, it was real. Tangled, dirty, raw, like her hair on that final day of triumph. In the grime was grace. In her oath, a vision of leadership deeper than any title. When her troops looked at her, they didn't see a figurehead draped in jewels. They saw someone who cared more for the cause than her own appearance. And that, more than any crown or coin, was what history could never fully erase. Even now, long after the lands of Parthia have eroded and its cities lie silent, her name rises in moments of defiance. Artists still summon her image. Writers still chase her footprints. A vow not to wash until victory. It sounds ludicrous to some. But to those who fought through injustice, it rings with truth. Rodigan wasn't about grandeur. She stood for grit. And in the end, it wasn't a crown of gold that honored her, but the very dust she wore proudly. Dust, the very substance emperors tried to flee in death. Yet she wore it like regalia. She was forgotten by kings, erased by scribes, but remembered by the earth itself. And that's where the true myths linger, not in marble but in the ground. Before borders clashed and kings feared her name, Tomius was simply a daughter of the plains. Born into the endless open winds, her homeland wasn't filled with sculpture or scrolls. It was raw, wild, and boundless. This was the land of the Masajte, nomadic warriors of the steppe who rode like ghosts and fought like flame. Their lives were governed by honor, survival, and speed. Little is known of Tomius's earliest days, but one can imagine their rhythm, riding before walking, loosing arrows before stringing full sentences. In her world, girls weren't hidden away. They trained beside the boys, fought beside the men, and bled for their people. Their tribe revered the sky and sun, lived off the land, and buried their warriors with blades so they could battle in the afterlife. They had no palaces, no golden shrines, just pride. And when threats approached, they didn't pray, they drew their bows. Tomius likely rose after her husband's death, if he ruled before her, but one thing is clear, she didn't wait for command to be handed to her. She seized it. In a time when women were property, Tomius ruled as sovereign. She held her ground with kings, spoke as an equal, and if her words weren't heeded, she made herself heard. She wasn't just a monarch. She was Shahat, the steppe's final move. A war chief armored in leather and iron, destined to confront the mightiest power of the ancient world. But for a woman, power never comes without danger. As she secured her place among her people, distant rumors began to stir. To the south, past the craggy peaks and vast emptiness, a man was watching. His name, Cyrus the Great. And he wanted more. The wind of the steppe was shifting. The wind screamed across the steppe, and Tomius, daughter of fighters, was about to ride into history. While she ruled over the wild, open plains, far to the south, a very different force was rising, organized, methodical, and unstoppable. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already taken Lydia to the west and Babylon to the south. His banners waved over deserts, highlands, and cities where the tongue changed every few days of travel. But Cyrus wasn't finished. He was an empire forger, and no builder ever stopped scanning the horizon. To him, the Masajte were a mix of risk and reward. They didn't possess golden palaces or stone-walled cities, but they held the northeastern border, a gateway to resources, trade lines, and strategic power. More crucially, they had something Cyrus couldn't overlook: pride. And to Cyrus, pride was something that could be twisted or shattered. But he wasn't just a warrior. He was a clever manipulator, known for politics as much as power. So rather than launching an invasion, he tried a classic royal tactic: peace through marriage. Historical sources, most notably Herodotus, tell us that Cyrus sent diplomats with a proposal: marriage to Queen Tomius. On paper, it looked perfect. The mighty Persian king united with the fierce ruler of the Masajte. But Tomius saw through it. She knew this wasn't about unity or affection. It was a calculated move to consume her people without ever drawing a blade. She refused. And that rejection echoed like a slap across the marble halls of Persepolis. With the polite route closed, Cyrus turned to the language he knew best: conquest. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural barrier dividing Persia from the lands of the Masajte. If he couldn't win her over, He would take everything by force. But Tomius wasn't idle. She knew her homeland. She knew the speed and fury of her warriors on horseback. And she understood this wasn't just about soil. It was a king's attempt to silence a woman who dared defy him. The most powerful man in the world had declared war on her. But he had no clue what storm he just stirred awake on the plains. Cyrus, seasoned in warfare and a master of schemes, believed he had the upper hand. He'd beaten kings, toppled strongholds, and commanded a realm spanning half the known world. To him, the Massagetes were just wandering riders, quick to fight, but with nothing solid to defend. He didn't know he just challenged someone as sharp as he was, and far more enraged. After refusing the marriage, Tomius sent him a blunt reply: "Cross the river, and you'll regret it." Cyrus crossed anyway. He built a floating bridge for his troops and advanced into enemy territory. Rather than meet him in open battle, Tomius pulled her forces back, letting him move deeper into unfamiliar terrain. The Persians discovered a deserted encampment, stocked with food and, notably, wine. To the Massagetes, wine was rare. To Cyrus's men, it was a temptation too good to pass up. It was bait. He took it. Believing the nomads had fled in fear, Cyrus stationed part of his army there, under General Harpagus, a commander he trusted. But as night fell, Tomius returned. Her warriors descended on the drunk, unsuspecting Persians with surgical brutality. The skirmish was swift and merciless. Among the fallen was Sparapises, Tomius's son and a commander in her army. Accounts differ. Some claim he was captured, and upon realizing his fate begged to die, or took his own life. Others say he perished in the fight. Either way, when word reached Tomius, something in her broke. Then solidified. Her grief boiled into fury, legendary, blistering, unstoppable. She sent another message to Cyrus. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a blood oath. "You hunger for war," she said. "I will see that you feast." She vowed to soak the battlefield in Persian blood. This wasn't going to be a quiet retaliation. Cyrus had taken her child. He had violated her land. And now, he would not face a queen. She wasn't just a ruler now. She was a mother mourning her fallen son, and the final face Cyrus would ever lay eyes on. The coming fight wouldn't be a clash. It would be a reckoning. The sun rose like a blade, slicing across the horizon with unforgiving light. At the head of her warriors stood Tomius, no longer merely a sovereign, but a storm in human form. Her fighters, shaped by the brutal simplicity of nomadic life, smeared their skin with ash and fury. This battle wasn't about diplomacy anymore. This was vengeance, written in blood. Cyrus, despite all his military brilliance, had gravely misjudged the Massagetes. He thought they'd be like the others, scattered, untrained, easy to defeat. But Tomius wasn't some tribal figurehead. She had been forged in hardship. She understood how to strike, not with chaos, but with lethal purpose. She gathered her warriors and launched a full-on offensive. This time, there would be no restraint. Where the final confrontation happened is unknown. Lost to the endless plains. But what's certain is that Tomius unleashed a thunderous counterattack. Her cavalry thundered forward like a tidal wave of blades, raining arrows from galloping horses. Then closing in for hand-to-hand slaughter, fighting with the desperation of those who had already lost everything. The Persian army, disciplined and seasoned, wasn't ready for this. Tomius wasn't directing from a distance. She rode with her soldiers, her very presence sparking a frenzy in their hearts. Every slash carried the weight of her son's memory. Every charge was a scream of fury hurled into the wind. Cyrus tried to keep the lines from breaking, but they shattered. His troops collapsed, many cut down where they stood. Others scattered into the grasslands, only to be hunted like prey. And Cyrus himself, conqueror of Babylon, Lydia, and nearly the entire known world, met his end in the chaos. Some stories say he was killed in the fight. Others claim he was taken alive and then executed. But all versions agree. He died on Tomius's terms. What came next has become infamous. As told by Herodotus, Ptolemus found his body among the dead. She ordered his head severed and, in a chilling act of symbolic vengeance, placed it in a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink deep," she reportedly said. "Drink what you long for." Whether historical fact or dramatic myth, it didn't matter. The message was eternal. Ptolemus would not be conquered. When the winds died down and the plains drank the blood of an empire, she stood tall, undefeated. The woman who brought down Cyrus the Great. Word of his fall rippled across the ancient world. The unstoppable Achaemenid Empire had been brought to its knees by a warrior from the wilderness. The Persians did their best to soften the blow, but the death of their founder was a scar that couldn't be hidden. Cyrus's remains were eventually returned and entombed with royal honors at Pasargadae. But the shadow of his final defeat lingered long after the burial. For Ptolemus and her people, the victory wasn't just payback. It was a bold proclamation. They hadn't just fought, they had fought with honor. Ptolemus had faced the mightiest ruler on earth. And she didn't just survive. She won. Then, just as suddenly as she rose to global renown, she vanished. No texts record what became of her. No account tells how or where she died. It's as if, after securing her vengeance, she let the wind carry her story onward. In later generations, historians and poets tried to fill in the gaps. She became more than a person, she became a legend. To the Persians, her name stung like a scar. To the Greeks, she was a contradiction, a so-called barbarian with more nobility than any king. And to the Central Asian tribes, she became myth. A queen who still rides the steppe, blade in hand, justice in her eyes. Her story took root in culture. Medieval texts painted her in shining armor. Renaissance art imagined her towering above the corpse of the man who once ruled continents. Each age reshaped her: mother, avenger, wild monarch, symbol of pride or warning of arrogance. But through it all, one thing stayed true. She didn't step into power through tradition, she carved it out through fury and fire. For a brief, unforgettable heartbeat in history, this queen of the plains proved that not all empires rise. Some are trampled beneath the hooves of those riding with vengeance in their blood. Most of what we know about Ptolemus doesn't come from her own people. The Massagetæ left behind no stone-carved chronicles or royal archives. Her story survives because of a Greek, Herodotus, often called the father of history, who wrote a century after she lived. He captured Ptolemus in his writings as a queen of ferocious will and fearsome justice. But Herodotus wasn't just jotting down facts. He was telling a story, part history, part parable. To him, and to his Greek readers, Ptolemus was poetic justice. She was the living reversal of imperial pride. Cyrus the Great, a man who had swallowed kingdoms whole, didn't fall to a massive army or a rival monarch. He was defeated by a mother. A woman who fought not for empire, but for her son. Her triumph was near mythical, and Herodotus treated it that way. He even recounted her brutal revenge, the wineskin full of blood, the severed head of Cyrus. And her infamous words, "Drink your fill." But was any of it real? Modern historians debate this endlessly. Some argue Herodotus embellished, or outright invented, parts of the tale. They say he used Ptolemus as a narrative weapon to humble the Persian Empire, which still loomed large over Greece in his time. Others believe that while the blood and wine moment may have been symbolic, Cyrus's death at Ptolemus's hands likely did happen. And then there's the issue of bias. For all his insight, Herodotus often viewed foreign cultures through a distinctly Greek perspective. He painted the Massagetæ as wild but noble, a kind of exotic reflection of Greek values like freedom and honor. In that view, Ptolemus wasn't just a barbarian queen. She was a moral reckoning for Persian pride. Still, whether the details blurred across time or not, Herodotus succeeded in one lasting mission. He made sure Ptolemus would be remembered. Because of his pen, she became more than a moment. She became a legend. And legends don't need perfect accuracy. They need impact. In that space between myth and memory, Tomius found her strange kind of immortality. In an age ruled by men, Herodotus gave us a queen who wouldn't bow, and whose enemies bled for underestimating her, though she struck down one of the greatest emperors of the ancient world. Tomius herself never ruled over an empire. She didn't build cities from stone or issue proclamations carved into gold. Her people, the Massagetæ, were nomads. They lived not by brick walls, but by wind, hoofbeats, and the stars above. This meant Tomius's legacy wasn't recorded in marble. It lived in firelight stories, in songs, in the hushed awe of soldiers who remembered her fury. The Massagetæ were one of many fierce steppe tribes. Their kin included the Scythians, the Saka, and the Dahi, all masters of horseback warfare who roamed the vast lands between the Caspian Sea and the edge of ancient China. These tribes were feared by empires for their speed, their unpredictability, and their brutal tenacity in battle. Tomius, as a woman at their helm, was rare, but not unheard of. Steppe culture, unlike the empires they fought, offered women far more freedom. Women could ride, they could hunt, they could draw blood in battle, and lead men into war. Among the Scythians, archaeologists have uncovered graves of female warriors buried with armor, weapons, and saddles, proof that the stories of warrior queens weren't just myths. Tomius was the highest embodiment of that fierce legacy. Her authority didn't stem from royal inheritance or divine mandate. It came from merit, grit, and a raw ability to lead. She united scattered clans. She governed. She fought. And in a world where survival depended on speed, skill, and fearlessness, she rose above all. But because the Massagetæ left no lasting monuments, Tomius became a queen of whispers, a phantom ruler, her name echoing not in scrolls, but on the wind. It's through foreign writings and the oral traditions of the steppe that her memory endured. To Persian chroniclers, she was a dire warning. To the Greeks, a marvel. And to her own people, likely a name carried in their veins and sung in the chants of war. A ghost who rode with them over endless plains. Empires are carved in stone, then crumble. But the steppe remembers and whispers on the wind. And Tomius, grieving, fierce, unbowed, became its echo. Centuries passed. The great empires that once circled the Massagetæ rose and eventually fell. Cyrus's descendants built Persepolis, warred with Alexander the Great, and faded into the dust of forgotten pages. But her legend endured, not in golden palaces, but in the hearts of those who refused to kneel. Across the heart of Central Asia, she became more than just a queen. She became an emblem of strength, of defiance, of the wild, untamed soul of the steppe. In truth, Tomius was bigger than borders. She wasn't Roman. She wasn't Greek. She wasn't Persian. And because of that, her story belonged to no empire. That made her dangerous. That made her unforgettable. In the Islamic Middle Ages, historians still recorded her name, changed slightly by tongue and time, but never erased. Some remembered her for her stern justice and righteous revenge. Others painted her as savage. Proof, they thought, that power in a woman's hands could be both magnificent and terrifying. By the Renaissance, European painters rediscovered her legend through Herodotus's pages. They rendered her in shining armor, standing triumphant over Cyrus's fallen form. In one bold work, she lifts his severed head like a grim trophy, soaked in victory. Dramatic? Certainly. But also political. Artists of the time were drawn to the idea of a woman who didn't merely exist in a man's world. She conquered it. By the 1800s and 1900s, her legacy took on new meaning. In Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tomius became a symbol of national pride. Poets wrote verses in her honor. Teachers spoke her name in classrooms. Her image rose in statues, was etched onto coins, and marched in military parades. The warrior queen, once clad in leather and wielding a bow, was now reborn in memory and rebellion, still galloping forward through history, In a modern world still unsure how to reckon with powerful women, Tomius remains a challenge. She wasn't meek. She wasn't saintly. She wasn't soft. She was sharp. Ruthless when needed. Merciful only to the deserving. She was resistance given form. And she wore the blood of empires like a crown. History tends to celebrate monument builders, lawmakers, kings who chisel their names into marble. Tomius did none of that. She left behind no castles, no legal scrolls, no dynasty. And yet, her name endured. Not because she held power forever, but because she refused to let history erase her. She defied the way women are often remembered, not as background figures, but as engines of fate. She didn't ask for recognition. She earned it through fire, through grief, through steel. She didn't ride behind a man. She rode at the front. Against one. And she won. Today, students from Central Asia to Europe learn her story. Not just because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to say no to him. She didn't defend a throne. She defended liberty. A liberty born from galloping horses, falcons in the sky, and warriors who slept beneath stars, not ceilings. Her face now rises in statues across Kazakhstan's capital cities. It appears in textbooks and on currency. To modern Central Asians, she is more than legend. She is the mother of nations. A thread to a proud, pre-Soviet, pre-Islamic past. A reminder that their identity was not formed in surrender, but in the roar of defiance and the thunder of hooves. In a divided world, by gender, by power, by the stories we choose to remember, Tomius stands tall. Not because she ended a king's life, but because she showed us something even greater. That dignity isn't granted. It's claimed. That leadership sometimes looks like a grieving mother. One who refuses to let her child's killer walk free. We often ask why some names last and others vanish. Tomius lasted because she was unforgettable. Because when women were expected to vanish behind tent flaps, she stepped forward, blade drawn, heart blazing, and carved her tale into the very skin of time. Empires crumble. Statues decay. But legends? They ride on. And somewhere in the sighing winds that sweep the open steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, unconquered, unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't a mere pastime. It was a meticulously engineered, state-sanctioned science wrapped in spiritual meaning. Centuries before modern apiaries, Egyptians had already perfected a structured, mobile method to manage bee colonies and gather honey. By 2400 BC, their tomb walls, especially in the sun-bleached necropolis of Saqqara, were already etched with detailed images of beekeeping in action. But this wasn't just farming. It was a sacred craft woven into agriculture, medicine, theology, and even the rituals of the dead. The Egyptians used rows of cylindrical clay hives positioned on their sides. They resembled long earthen pipes, nothing like today's wooden boxes. These hives weren't stationary either. As the Nile ebbed and flowers bloomed, beekeepers migrated them up and down the river, following the nectar's path. It was essentially an ancient GPS system, but for bees. To calm the swarms during harvest, they didn't wear protective suits. Instead, they blew smoke gently into the hives using stone or clay tubes. A mix of timing, instinct, and boldness that required no small amount of nerve. Honeycombs were removed with care. The golden liquid they harvested wasn't just food, it was medicine, it was embalming fluid, it was divine. Honey was considered sacred, a gift from the heavens. According to Egyptian lore, bees were born from the tears of the sun deity, Ra, as they dropped to earth. This wasn't just mythology, it defined their reverence. Bees were treated as messengers between humans and the gods. Honey was a standard offering in temples, a staple in funerary rites, and even used in trade like currency. Medicinal scrolls, ancient papyri, listed it in over 500 treatments. It was mixed with wine, herbs, or milk to heal wounds, fight infections, and soothe digestive troubles. Even if they lacked the modern science behind it, they grasped its healing power. Beeswax was equally treasured, used in cosmetics, in preserving the dead, and even in writing tools. It became an everyday material for scribes, priests, and doctors alike. To ancient Egyptians, the hive was more than just a source of sweetness. It symbolized harmony, healing, and cosmic structure, nurtured under the vigilant care of both mortal hands and immortal forces. While Egypt sanctified beekeeping with spiritual meaning and ritual, ancient Mesopotamia gave it something just as important: law. The birthplace of civilization, home to irrigation systems, cuneiform, and bustling cities, also recognized the economic and cultural weight of honey. Even though Mesopotamian beekeeping left fewer visual records than Egypt, its presence is embedded in their legal codes and clay records. Mentions of bees and honey date back to the Sumerian period. In Akkadian and Babylonian texts, the word neans refers to apiaries, beekeeping gardens. Often, these were situated near temples or royal compounds, implying the practice was controlled by elites and closely guarded. Honey and beeswax weren't just luxuries. They were sacred offerings, medical staples, food ingredients, and trade commodities. Losing a hive wasn't a minor inconvenience. It could be an economic catastrophe. Perhaps the most powerful proof of this comes from the Code of Hammurabi, written around 1754 BC. Best known for its laws on theft, injury, and farming, it also includes rules about bees. If someone let their bees swarm into another's field and caused damage, they were held accountable. If honey was stolen, compensation had to be paid, often in silver or equivalent honey vessels. In a society where most value was measured in barley or wheat, the fact that honey had its own legal standing says everything. And to the Mesopotamians, bees weren't just insects, they were symbols. Some writings even cast them as divine messengers. In Mesopotamian tradition, bees weren't just insects, they were linked to Ninit, the deity overseeing both agriculture and warfare. Beeswax held particular importance. It wasn't just used to seal tablets or scrolls. It shaped sacred figurines, straddling the worlds of practicality and ritual. It served both scribes and sorcerers. Though exact blueprints of Mesopotamian beehives haven't survived intact, historians suspect they used hives fashioned from mud brick or woven reeds, designs similar to those found in the early Levant. These hives likely rested in shaded gardens or on rooftops, shielded from the region's scorching sun. Unlike Egypt's spiritually infused approach, Mesopotamian apiculture was grounded in order and structure. It was a system meant to balance resources, regulate fairness, and maintain the economic backbone of a society where even a bee sting could trigger a legal case. Here, the beehive wasn't only a marvel of biology. It reflected the very essence of civilization. Rule, order, and the relentless push towards social structure. In the rugged highlands of ancient Anatolia, before the Greeks rose to prominence, the Hittites had quietly perfected their own form of beekeeping. But to them, this wasn't a quaint craft. It was sacred. To the Hittites, bees were agents of purification, messengers that moved between the human realm and the unseen world. Their significance wasn't only agricultural, it was spiritual. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where honey production was a mix of science and economy, the Hittites leaned heavily into ritual. Texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BC speak of bees not just as honeymakers but as participants in spiritual ceremonies. In one striking ritual account, a bee is summoned to carry away evil, impurity, and divine wrath. And unlike many ritual animals of the time, the bee was not sacrificed, but released. This rare mercy hints at the deep reverence they held for the tiny creature. Honey, in Hittite culture, had both flavor and sanctity. It was poured out in religious ceremonies, offered in sacrifices, and mixed with milk, wine, or grain in rituals meant to anoint and cleanse. Honey wasn't just consumed, it was sanctified. As for the beekeeping itself, clues suggest the Hittites used clay or straw hives stored near temples or palaces, perhaps even portable ones similar to those seen in Egypt. Though physical evidence is limited, similarities with neighboring Syrian and Levantine cultures suggest tube-like hives made of natural materials. Their beekeepers were likely temple workers, tightly connected to sacred festivals and state ceremonies. Honey served the gods, soothed wounds, and sweetened diplomatic gestures. Despite their small size, bees carried enormous symbolic weight. The Hittites also contributed significantly to early environmental awareness. They understood bee migration. Some preserved texts mention how bees responded to seasons and blooming cycles, showing a level of ecological insight rarely seen in the ancient world. In Anatolia, the buzz of a hive wasn't background sound. It was a holy hum, a living thread connecting kings to gods. The ancient Greeks didn't merely keep bees. They studied them, revered them, and modeled ideals around their complex world. To the Hellenes, the hive was more than a source of honey. It was a metaphor brought to life, a mirror of the city-state, a symbol of divine structure, a never-ending source of wonder. Greek beekeepers combined technical skill with philosophical flair. Where earlier civilizations used fixed clay tubes, the Greeks pioneered movable ceramic hives. These featured detachable tops and segmented compartments, making it easier to collect honey without harming the colony, an early example of sustainable harvesting. They also refined the use of smoke to manage bees. With ceramic bellows and clay smoke pipes, they gently sedated the hive before collection. This reduced stings and preserved the hive's integrity, allowing multiple extractions each year. One of the most brilliant minds of the era, Aristotle, delved deep into bee behavior. In his Historia Animalium, he recorded astonishingly detailed notes. He observed different bee roles, gatherers, defenders, and one prominent figure he called the king bee. While he erred on the leader's gender, his work laid the groundwork for centuries of entomological study. Honey occupied a sacred space in ancient Greek life. It wasn't merely a sweetener, it enhanced wine, preserved fruits, and enriched cakes with flavor. Medicinally, it served as the foundation for healing ointments, especially for treating wounds. To the Greeks, honey wasn't just useful, it was divine. They believed that ambrosia, the mythical nourishment of the gods, was crafted from a blend of honey and wine. Bees themselves carried mythological weight. They were linked with Artemis, goddess of the wild, and Demeter, protector of the harvest. In fact, Artemis priestesses were known as Melissa, a name that literally means bee. To the Greeks, the bee symbolized a sacred feminine power. It embodied discipline, purpose, and delicate grace. The hive wasn't just a natural marvel, it was a spiritual symbol. By observing bees, the Greeks believed they were glimpsing the underlying laws of the universe, and possibly the gods themselves. If the Greeks looked upon bees with reverence and curiosity, the Romans approached them with ambition and enterprise. Beekeeping in the Roman Empire wasn't confined to rural backyards. It became an agricultural industry on a massive scale. From the lush vineyards of Gaul to the rolling fields of Hispania, Rome turned beekeeping into an empire-spanning endeavor. They borrowed much of their bee knowledge from the Greeks and Etruscans, but codified it into a practical science. Writers like Varro and Columella penned extensive manuals detailing how to construct hives, care for colonies, and move hives as needed. Their writings revealed strikingly modern insights on bee swarming, seasonal management, and even pest control. Roman hives came in varied shapes and materials: hollowed logs, cork tubes, clay containers, and baskets coated in mud or dung. These designs were flexible, more insulation for cold climates, more airflow in hot regions. Adaptability was key. To calm bees, the Romans burned aromatic herbs like thyme or oregano in clay pots, letting the smoke lull the hive into peace. This not only reduced stings but may have subtly flavored the honey. Harvesting was done using iron blades, and wax was separated by heating and straining. Beeswax had many uses: candles, cosmetics, waterproofing ships, and crafting writing tablets. Honey was found in nearly every corner of Roman life. It was mixed into wine to make mulsum, added to baked goods, blended into sauces for meat and seafood, and even used as a high-energy food for athletes and soldiers. Roman doctors, drawing from Hippocratic traditions, prescribed honey to treat coughs, fevers, infections, and digestive troubles. They recognized its healing powers even without understanding its scientific basis. but the most characteristically Roman aspect of apiculture was its structure. Large estates often ran professional apiaries staffed by enslaved workers and overseen by property managers. Production was tracked in records. Extra honey was sold or shipped across provinces. To Roman minds, bees weren't just insects, they were model citizens, organized, diligent, and endlessly productive. A thriving hive reflected an ideal Roman household, disciplined, efficient, and fruitful. While ancient civilizations collected honey and wax for tangible use, many also viewed bees as vessels of the divine. In cultures across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bees weren't merely living organisms. They were sacred emissaries, fluttering between the human and spiritual worlds, bringing gifts that bridged nature and the heavens. In Egypt, the bee's mythic origin lay in a divine act. According to belief, the tears of Are, the solar deity, fell to earth and became bees. Honey from these bees was no ordinary sweet. It was an offering for gods, a companion for souls entering the afterlife. The bee even became a royal emblem. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title He of the Sedge and the Bee, a name binding their authority to cosmic order and the hive's harmony. In Greek culture, bees carried strong feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, goddesses of fertility and the untamed wild, were called Melissae or bees. These women were believed to serve as vessels for divine communication. Even the oracle at Delphi, one of the most revered religious sites in the ancient world, was rumored to have once been governed by bee priestesses. Priestesses devoted to bees held a sacred role. Even the renowned Pythia, the oracle of Delphi, was occasionally referred to as the Delphic bee. To the ancients, a beehive symbolized a flawless system, orderly, self-sacrificing, and endlessly productive. Thinkers and spiritual teachers likened the inner workings of a hive to the ideal society: harmonious, hardworking, and full of reverence. The Stoic philosophers deeply respected bees for their unwavering sense of purpose. Later, Christian symbolism adopted the bee as an emblem of purity and resurrection, creatures that labored yet felt no lust. In Mesopotamian magical practices, bees featured prominently in purification rituals. Hittite ceremonies even described live bees absorbing communal impurity, and then being released, carrying away sin on fragile wings. Honey and wax weren't just used, they were sanctified. They were burned in ritual flames, molded into protective charms, and written into magical invocations for healing and blessings. The bee wasn't just a poetic metaphor, it was seen as a connector, a living bridge. It dwelled in hidden places, produced golden nourishment without violence, and only stung in self-defense. To ancient minds, bees weren't merely wonderful, they were sacred. To ancient civilizations, honey wasn't just a tasty delight, it was celestial medicine. Even before bacteria had been discovered, people intuitively trusted honey to cleanse wounds, ease coughs, and preserve the body. It felt like magic, but in truth, it was science, long before chemistry was officially understood. In Egypt, honey was a foundational component of healing. Texts like the Ebers Papyrus, dated around 1550 BC, featured honey in hundreds of remedies. It was blended with milk, garlic, figs, and herbs to address conditions from eye irritation to stomach ailments. When combined with resins or animal fats, honey formed medicinal balms applied to burns and open wounds. Healers observed that these injuries mended faster and resisted infection, a result of honey's acidity and hydrogen peroxide content. The Greeks followed suit. Hippocrates, considered the father of modern medicine, recommended honey for fatigue, ulcers, and respiratory issues. He developed oxymel, a tonic made of honey and vinegar, used to break down mucus and reduce fever. Olympic athletes drank diluted honey water, believing it restored their strength more effectively than wine or plain water. In India, honey played a prominent role in Ayurvedic medicine. Known as madhu, it was categorized by its origin, taste, and healing strength. Ayurvedic texts warned against heating honey too much, but praised its ability to treat indigestion, coughs, wounds, and even toxins. It was also used in worship rituals, offered to the gods, and consumed during sacred fasting for both physical and spiritual cleansing. The Romans also highly valued honey's curative properties. Pliny the Elder catalogued numerous honey-based treatments in his Natural History. Honey was an ingredient in salves, mouth rinses, laxatives, and battlefield dressings. A mixture of honey and poppy extract was even administered as a sedative. Roman surgeons frequently used honey to soothe inflammation and prevent infection after injuries. Beeswax, too, had its medical roles, used in the base of healing plasters, protective creams, and even dental fillings due to its flexibility and resistance to decay. In every sense, honey wasn't merely a sweetener. It was a life-giving elixir. It healed illness, preserved the dead, and symbolized divine purity. To the ancients, it was a holy remedy, delivered by the tiny wings of bees. Ancient beekeepers were more than simple agricultural workers. They were innovators, engineers, and careful watchers of the natural world. Each culture refined tools and practices that allowed for effective hive management, ethical honey harvesting, and safe interaction with bees. The shape and function of the hive was one of their most impactful breakthroughs. The Egyptians popularized elongated clay hives, cylindrical tubes stacked side by side. These designs were portable, resilient, and closely resembled the natural tree hollows where bees preferred to nest. Greek and Roman beekeepers used similar terracotta hives, along with baskets woven from organic fibers. Many featured lids that could be removed, allowing access to honeycombs without dismantling the entire colony. This innovation made it possible to collect honey without harming the bees themselves. A breakthrough innovation, this paved the road for sustainable honey harvesting practices. In ancient times, keepers of bees used smoke as a calming method. The Greeks were the first to craft clay puffers and bellows to direct smoke gently into hive entrances. This smoke cloaked the warning chemicals released by the defender bees, helping to reduce hostility. The Romans improved on this by burning soothing herbs like oregano or thyme, which relaxed the bees and possibly gave the honey a slight herbal flavor. When it came time to collect the honey, tools like wooden or bronze blades were used to cut the honeycombs with care. In some cases, the combs were pressed to release the honey, while the wax was melted down, filtered, and saved for other uses. Protective gear was almost non-existent. Most beekeepers relied solely on their skill, experience, and gentleness to avoid getting stung. Gloves and full suits were far from invention. Surviving records show that ancient beekeepers studied their bees closely. They noted patterns in swarming, seasonal changes, and even the necessity of relocating hives to chase the blooming of flowers. In fact, some ancient societies practiced a form of hive migration, transporting bees across distances to maximize nectar collection, much like today's mobile beekeeping operations. Storing honey was also a key concern. The Egyptians kept their honey in tightly sealed ceramic containers, keeping moisture and decay at bay. It was well understood even then that honey could last for generations. Some jars have been found in ancient tombs, still perfectly preserved. Beyond the physical labor, spiritual rituals were often performed to honor the spirits of the bees, asking for their cooperation and protection, and warding off misfortune. This blend of sacred care and technical know-how was essential to keeping the hives healthy and productive. In summary, ancient apiculture was a mix of engineering, biology, and belief. Their tools and methods still form the backbone of what modern beekeepers do today. The ancient craft of beekeeping shaped a lasting bond between humans and bees that endures even in our present age. It was far more than a method of farming. It was a delicate science and cultural art that influenced healing, worship, commerce, and environmental thinking. From Egypt's floodplains to Anatolia's mountains, from Greek sanctuaries to Roman estates, these early apiarists perfected systems to protect and nurture their hives. Their ideas around hive construction, strategic smoking, and seasonal migration supported ongoing, ethical honey harvesting. They honored the bees' natural rhythms, cultivating a relationship of respect and balance between people and the pollinators. They saw honey not just as food, but as medicine. And their ancient insights became part of the first medical traditions in Egypt, India, and Rome. Those same ideas influence alternative health remedies even now. Honey's healing properties, its ability to prevent infection and preserve flesh, became the basis of early wound care. Beeswax, too, played its part, shaping innovations in personal care, art, and even building materials. The symbolic role of bees and honey echoed through temples and stories. In many ancient faiths, bees were honored in ceremonies, their honey presented in sacred offerings. Even today, these rites continue in some cultures, keeping alive the ancient view of bees as symbols of cosmic harmony. The hive became a metaphor for social unity, divine grace, and purposeful life. Bees were often imagined as carriers of messages between realms or emblems of spiritual rebirth. And these ideas live on in literature, myth, and visual art. Notably, the ancient technique of moving hives with the seasons, to follow flower cycles, remains a key part of modern farming. Today's massive agricultural systems rely on this same concept to ensure crop pollination and global food supplies. The wisdom of the ancients helped lay the foundation for our modern awareness of the bee's vital ecological role, and our understanding of how fragile that role has become. Even in an age of advanced technology, the bond between humanity and bees hasn't changed. We depend on them for sustenance, medicine, and ecosystem stability. And they have shaped our societies, economies, and beliefs for thousands of years. The legacy of those early beekeepers is one of brilliance, reverence for nature, and cooperation, both inside the buzzing hive and across the boundary between species. It stands as a reminder that even the tiniest of creatures can shape the destiny of civilizations.